Hi, I'm Marc A. Wolfe from Marc A. Wolfe Enterprises, and I help turn conversations into outcomes.
Great. Good morning, Marc. Good to see you, buddy.
Good morning. Good morning to you.
We are recording this in the midst of maybe the greatest bit of chaos I've ever seen in my lifetime. We're right in the middle of the COVID-19 coronavirus, whatever phrase you want to put on it, outbreak, pandemic, everything. And Marc and I have gotten to know each other over the last few months, and we've been talking about doing this podcast. And I think there's a bit of it's a bit providential that we're doing this episode in the middle of this based on what you do. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But Marc lives in Franklin, Tennessee. But as you'll hear from his accent, he's probably not from Franklin, Tennessee. So give us a little bit of background, Marc, where you're from, your kind of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so yes, this is not a Southern accent, and I don't have a New Jersey accent where originally that's where I'm from. So I was born and raised in New Jersey, in northern New Jersey. So you might hear a few words like daughter, where I add a few extra syllables. But yes, I've only moved to the South 10 years ago, and it was a great move. But I've come from a northern understanding of being intense, moving quickly, and business comes first. And now I moved to the South, and I realized that there's way more important things than just what business is all about.
Well, I think in the South, I hope at least that we try to find a balance, right? It's almost one of these things when it's time to do business or it's time to do whatever that is work related. We're really intense on that, but yet we are able at times to sort of switch the focus to just hanging out, having a good time, being around people, enjoying life. And again, we're right in the middle of this coronavirus thing. And that's one of the things I'm noticing, Marc, is that people are just freaking out on a level that I've not seen. And I think it's because there's so much fear, there's so much unknown. But I wonder about you as a self-employed entrepreneur. You said you've been in Franklin for 10 years. So that means that you were self-employed during the last big market crash back in '08 and '09, right?
Yeah, I've been self-employed since pretty much I started my first business when I was 14. And out of my 51 years of living, pretty much 95% of my life has been as a 1099. I've owned my own business, worked as a consultant, as a strategist, and literally have seen ups and downs. And when I moved to Franklin, we had the flood here, which was the devastating flood in Nashville that there was even a flood in New Jersey before I left. So I've been through September 11th. I've been through, this are obviously everyone's first real pandemic, H1N1. You had other issues, but what I see consistently in all this is that it's how you behave during it, what your focus is, and really who you believe you are, right? And
Okay.
that's the thing that I see the most is that take a time where there's not this panic. And I see people struggling. I see people struggling in business when they're in the best economic times. Before 2008, right? We had this boom and everything was going great. And I still saw people struggling because they didn't know what to do with success. They didn't know what the next move was. They didn't know how to make decisions. And some of those fundamentals, there were still businesses and people suffering, even in the midst of massive upsides.
So let's make this very personal. How do you keep your head? How do you not panic during all of these times when you're self-employed, when you are the gross national product of your business and of your family, that it is, you're the one who has to, as Dave Ramsey says, leave the cave, kill something and drag it home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess growing up with an entrepreneurial spirit where I knew that when I saw something in a business, even when I was young and when I was first starting out, I was like, wondered, well, why did they do it that way? And not just to ask, because I really wanted to understand. So when you grow up understanding, and my parents weren't entrepreneurs, pretty much a first generation entrepreneur in my family. And you start to wonder, you start to look at people and what they believe their security is. So many of my friends have 9 to 5 jobs, or maybe 9 to 9 lately because they work overtime, and they're salaried. And I see them put their hope in, well, we're going to get a check every 2 weeks. And I just look and I say, I have plenty of people that I've watched lose their jobs because the company said, well, we had a bad quarter, and they fire people. So being an entrepreneur, I say, well, if I want more than 3% salary raise this year, just get more clients. If I
Mm-hmm.
want to go, and there may be tough times, but you look and go, well, if you level it out, I actually can create the growth in my company by actually changing my products or adjusting. I don't have to depend on somebody else doing this for me. So I feel like I have more control, but that's not everybody's cup of tea.
Well, so here's Dee's theory. You and I are about the same age. We are the children of the generation whose goal in life was to get a job with a very stable company, a big
Mhm.
company, do their 30 years, 35 years, whatever, get the gold watch and retire with a pension. Our economy and our world has changed so much. There really aren't those jobs out there. And so the whole idea of job security is an illusion. It didn't used to be. You could go to work for General Motors in Detroit or wherever, and you could know that you could work there for those years. So I think a lot of it is we still think in terms that there is such a thing as job security, and I just don't think there is much anymore, short of working for the federal government, and even they've been shut down.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think it's a mindset, right? Like, entrepreneurialism isn't for everyone. There's things in my job I don't like to do, and luckily I outsource bookkeeping and lawyers and other things. And when you work for somebody else, there's the security of, well, they're going to take care of all this for me. And I think when you're an entrepreneur, or even when you're a small business owner that has multiple employees, you still have to rely on other people. So there's
Yeah,
this community effect. Again, so even though I have a small business, I work for some of the largest companies. One of my clients was a Fortune 100 company that I worked for many years doing consulting work. And as I look at that, I said, okay, well, you still have to serve a client and produce a result and continue to do what they need you to do. I feel like I'm more challenged to have to produce than people who can actually go and say, well, I got security. I'm vested.
yeah, yeah. I think one of the great misconceptions that we have in business is that there are only some people in sales.
Mhm.
And it's not really true. We all are in sales because no matter what our job is, some product or service has to be exchanged for money.
Right. Well, if you're married, you're in sales, because there's no way that my wife would be with me 24 years if I didn't do a good sales job on her in the beginning, telling her what the future was going to look like. And, now we're proud to have 2 daughters that are in college, and they're doing better and more active in some of the things they're doing in college than I was. And I was like, wow, I can't believe that this worked out this way. This is fantastic. This is,
Do you think either one of them have the entrepreneurial bug that you have?
it's funny because I see things in them. My wife's an interior designer by trade. She helped raise our kids, so she kind of didn't do interior design formally during most of their lives. She helped raise them. And I look and I see artistic in one of our children and business sense in the other, but neither one of them really want to go and be a full entrepreneur. But we'll see. They're 19 and 21 right now. So we'll see when it comes down to actually what they want to do, if they start using those skills, maybe not to own a business, but to help assist others.
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about what you do, what your company does, what you do as a consultant. How do you serve people?
Yeah. So we, I listen a lot, Dee. So when it is about turning conversations into outcomes, I don't just like talk. I like the ability for what we think about in our business, or what we think about, which our mission and vision is, to actually execute on it and to bring people along. Because when I meet someone like you, or I meet someone out and I have a conversation, I want to know what they do and why they do it, right? Because there's a lot of opportunities. I could refer people to them, but I only refer people to them if they're literally, it's the sweet spot of what they do. So when you really listen to people, And again, consultant and executive coach, these are titles. But when I think
Right.
about it, I'm put on earth to listen to people, to understand what motivates and drives them to do what they do, and then to align that with other resources, including people in their own team or outside of their team, to go and help them succeed. Now, if you think about it, so example would be I'll have a conversation with someone that I meet at a large corporation, and they're moving into a new role. Now they happen to be friends with me. They live here. They're moving into a new role, and I ask a question, and be like, "Well, you've never done this C-level role before. Like, what do you think it's going to look like?" They're like, "Well, they need me to do X, Y, and Z. They need me to help run finances. They need me to help do some strategy here. They need." Okay, great. Well, have you ever done that before? No. Okay. What do you think that's going to look like? And they're just like, well, I'll figure it out. And that's what a lot of companies do. They'll let people figure it out. We like you for your skills, and here, go run. We'll give you some latitude. And what I did is I started to have this conversation. We started to coach because I started to ask questions. I found that this person really liked to interact with others, right? Wasn't a typical finance guy. Started to
Mm-hmm.
have conversations and looked and said, I really want to know more about this organization. Okay, well, let's set up a way so you can actually start dialoguing with the people. Let's find a way where you can actually get some insight and to see what they see the vision of the company is. They've been here for long enough. Let's get the real true understanding. Now, a lot of companies will go and say, well, we'll do a survey. I was like, imagine a C-level coming over to a company with hundreds of employees and saying, let's just sit down and have a chat. Okay, that's too rare. And then we take that information and we say, okay, what are we going to do with it? We hear about the people's fears. We hear about things they would never say in a group. We hear about how it could be organized and what the future of the company could look like if they made some changes. And that's that raw data that we go and say, okay, what do we do with it? And that's the part I love, because if you take pure consulting, it's people are like, okay, let's just fix this. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And if you take a coaching approach, you start to go and say, well, what's missing? Is it can you communicate better with the team? Is there a way to dialogue? Is there, why does this change? That's the part I think really gets interesting when you really get to start spending time with people and understanding what drives them, motivates them.
All right. So if you're having these conversations with these people and you're listening to them talk about a new role or the role that they're in, what are the metrics that you listen for, that you look for as they're talking? You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Hmm.
there
Hmm.
has to be some fundamentals that you look for that are markers for success, that are markers to be an effective executive. What are those things that you're listening for as you're having these conversations?
So I listen for, there's an external appearance on the company. So when I meet somebody, I usually know a little about what they do. And I like to do a little bit of research and be like, okay, so what do I see externally, not as an employee of this company or have any insider information? And then you go and you listen to people and you find out what they're starting to tell you about what their perception is, either starting new or what they're early on. I love when people are new in a role because they ask lots of questions. They have really fresh eyes to ask questions that it would be embarrassing if you worked there 10 years to ask.
Right.
So I use metrics to look at and find out what they think it is, and then I start talking to other employees. I start talking to other people and say, okay, so this is what I don't even tell them what I hear. I say, tell me what's
Mm-hmm.
going on, and then you talk to employees that have been there different years and have had different roles. What you start to see as I start to see trends, I come up with a hypothesis, right? I come up with
Okay.
this is my perception of what's going on, and then we start to measure based on data. Like, I like to do assessments. I like to start
Okay.
asking questions. Like to look at financials. I like to look at all this other data to go and say, okay, well, how can we move one thing forward? For example, companies that have lots of employees, not every division is as successful as another. So when you
Mm-hmm.
work with a division of an organization, it's really easy to go and say, okay, well, what do we need to improve and why are you different than the rest of your organization?
Okay.
And when you find out, you can find out what's going on with their people, and you find out, okay, guess what? They're not being communicated because they're not the golden child. They're not the one making the most money. They're not the one. Okay, well, how do you go and take this underperforming division and you actually start giving them the love because they
Mm-hmm.
aren't the ones that are the shining star? What we want to do is we want to treat people as if they were just as valuable no matter what they produce. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's equal in the eyes of the company. What it means is that
Right.
if a division has a role, what are they supposed to be doing or producing to the best of their ability. And how do we do that? And that's where we go to the fundamentals of communication. We go to the fundamentals of the product. We go to fundamentals of how are they, what's the perception, even by their own organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. And then we measure that based on obviously whatever the client wants, which is, increased revenue or market share or what's going on from employee turnover. So
Okay.
there's a lot of different ways to be able to do it. It's just that I want to make sure that people understand that either they're supposed to be in that role and they're supposed to be performing at a certain level, or there's some disconnect, and let's find out what that is.
So, have you had many opportunities to have what is a very uh, complicated conversation? If you are consulting with a guy and it becomes very apparent that he's in a role that he's ill suited for whatever reason, it can be for a variety of reasons. What do you tell the guy maybe that's listening right now that says, I'm just not good at what I do, or I'm not fulfilled, or I'm in a bad fit? I mean, how do we help people out of bad fits?
We find out how they got into that bad fit in the first place, right? I want to start to unwind and say, so you got this promotion, let's say, let's just use that as an example, or
Okay.
you're in a role where you thought this was something, or you were told this was something. This is what I see a lot. Hey, we need you to be promoted to go to this role. This is what's going to happen. And people buy into that. And then all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
they realize it's not what was pitched. Right.
Right.
So I see a lot of men want it for, unfortunately, depending on your age or even just the way you think, it's like the wrong reasons. Wow. Once I get this title, I'll finally get to be what I wanted to be, vice
Okay.
president, EVP. And they wanted it for the wrong reasons. So unfortunately, it's a lot easier for them to be put in the wrong roles because they had the wrong motivation. So I liked them to reflect internally first on why they wanted what they thought was something that was going to give them value. Sometimes it's money, usually a salary increase.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's prestige. Sometimes they've been in a company long enough where they're like, well, now those people I worked with, I can surpass them. So we have to look at the motivation first to see, because if I don't deal with something internal with people first, we can blame everything else in the company. Look at how they lied to me. Look at how things changed. Look at how I was promised things. It's everybody else's fault. How well does that work in life when we blame everybody else except ourselves?
Well, it's much easier to blame everybody else, but in the final analysis, you're right. Uh, there's very few times where you are forced to take a job, where you are forced to take a promotion. I mean, we're all big boys, and ultimately, it's our decision,
Yes. And I've
right?
seen
And
people that are really forward thinking turn down promotions because they found the place they love to live. And again, I want to bring back this New Jersey part. When I lived in New Jersey, lived there for 40 years, right? I saw more transient people that said, I was forced to move to New Jersey and I can't wait to leave. Now,
okay,
again, growing up here, you're in New Jersey, you're thinking, well, why? You got four seasons, you're close to New York. There's a lot of things when you grow up there, you don't know why you would want to leave
right.
until your wife says, who's from Indiana, says, oh, we've got to go. Because once we had kids, she's like, we just need to leave New Jersey. And I was like, well, you met me here. She saw it differently, and she wanted to be somewhere in the Midwest. Well, when we came to Franklin and we moved again
Mm-hmm.
outside of Nashville, you know what I saw? I saw people turning down promotions because they were like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to stay here for the rest of my life. I'm like, hold on, you're 45. What do you
Yeah.
mean? This isn't like a retirement community. Like, they're
Yeah.
like, no, this is home. And they weren't from here. So I've seen people turn down things. So that's when I know they're putting something else ahead of what work success looks like. Because the company
Mm-hmm.
said, well, if you don't move, you're not going to get another role. They're like, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
There are a lot of guys listening to that description fondly, going, I would love to be in that spot, that to find a place where they're that happy outside of work, right? Because that's actually a lot of what you're saying is a lot of these people in Franklin, love Middle Tennessee, love Nashville. And so they're like, yeah, I'm so happy with everything else. Even if I have to change jobs, I still want to stay here.
Yeah. And Dee, you know what? And I have to remind my daughters again and remind myself, it's not about happy, because Owning your own
Mhm.
business, you're not always happy. Working out as an employer, you're not always happy. It's this joy because my wife reminded me early in our relationship, she's like, we're a family before we have kids. And I was like, no, you got to have kids to have families. She's like, no, we got married. We're a family. And I was like, huh.
Yeah.
So sometimes you get wisdom where you wouldn't expect it. Right.
Mhm.
Sometimes you look and you say, well, I'm not happy. And that's why a lot of people don't stay married because they're like, I'm not happy anymore. I was like, okay, well, who promised you happiness? And
Mhm.
who promised you happiness in your job? So as we talk about kind of the pandemic, it's like people are concerned because they have uncertainty.
Mhm.
And I look at this and I look at what's going on in the news and I look at what we're hearing about. And I told some of my friends and my family, I said, you will know somebody potentially that gets this. I mean, they will get the coronavirus because it's going to be so pervasive. But first of all, it's not a death sentence for everybody. And second of all, when you were concerned about the flu, and I know it's more than the flu, we just did not, people didn't wash their hands. They didn't take things seriously. I said,
Right.
sometimes you need a wake up call to go and be able to do something. We didn't bring up this upon ourselves, but just like in business, sometimes you need a wake up call. Sometimes you've been in the wrong position for so long that when you actually have this structure of you got to either move and leave where you love, or you
Mhm.
got to go and actually say no. And you got to look and go, you know what? I need to take a stand for this because there's more than just what's going on at work. There's more than just, and you may not be happy, but over the long haul, if it's the right decision, that's when things really start to change in your life when you realize, hold on, I made a tough decision and it actually played out correctly because it's more than just about how I feel at this moment.
Yeah, I try to substitute happy for content.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that there's a piece that comes with that, and it is less impacted by external factors. The
Yes.
contentment is inner. It's
Hmm.
just based on what you just said, that that contentment comes that you made a decision, you made the correct decision, you made a decision based on the best information you had, and you have the contentment of knowing that you did your due diligence and you did the best that you could, you made the best decision that you could, then you release it. And because a lot of times the outcomes are not or are influenced by factors completely out of your control.
Yes.
But if you're content with yourself that you made it the right way, that's kind of a nice place to be.
And the thing is, there's the 5-5-5 rule. How will I feel in 5 minutes, 5 months, 5 years, right? So there's a lot of different ways. I think we are impulsive in a lot of our decisions sometimes because we make it look sexier than it really is. So we're like, oh, if I get this, then this will happen. So when you go back
Mm-hmm.
to being an entrepreneur, and I think fundamentally our economy is going to change, and this is one of those deciding factors like September 11th, where air travel changed. And we said, oh, well, airlines were only, literally on the ground for a few days and things like that. I was like, no, no, no. TSA was created. Homeland Security was created. Doors were put
Mm-hmm.
differently on planes. Planes flew different routes. This pandemic's going to cause people to have more Zoom calls and webinars and other things because they realize, wow, a lot of these don't need to be in-person meetings. The thing I look at is that when you start to shift things on people, what they weren't prepared for, or they were doing it
Mm-hmm.
incorrectly in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't just make it work out easily. People working remote right now, that just doesn't make things work well just because you took a bad communication process. Now you split people to work in their homes, which they weren't really wanting to. Some people actually love their homes for their homes and don't want to work in it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, now they're working in their homes. Now the sanctity of this is where I go to escape work is now where they have worked. And you look at this and go, now I have to have Zoom calls and my background and now my kids and my dog. And you're causing more stress. And then they have parents and grandparents they have to take care of and they're worried about. So I think a lot of things are going to come together in a way where before it was kind of masked because you went to work and nobody saw it. So a lot of
Okay.
things are going to be exposed now where people are going to have to be a little bit more transparent. They're going to have to communicate in a different way. They might not be able to just be able to group together and just pass your door in an office and go, "Hey, what's going on?" Where they were so
Right.
used to casually doing that. There's going to be a little more intention to set up a Zoom call or actually go and have collaboration among groups. This is an opportunity that I see with my clients because I'm having conversations with them to say, you need to check in on the emotional status of people that are going through things that you as a leader might be like, this is going to be fine. But when you have
Right.
4 or 5 generations in the workforce, they might not perceive it and actually be living it the same way you think it's going for yourself.
That's an interesting perspective on it. I don't know that I've heard anybody look at this pandemic that way. I think we all understand that something's going to change. Uh, I think we're all trying to guess and look down the road and see what that thing is. And so that's an interesting perspective about what it is. I think, I don't know. Uh, I think some new technologies are going to have to come out, or some improved technologies, because I think the whole community aspect of life, we can't lose that. Humans can't live without it.
Mhm.
And I'm watching I was a pastor for 11 years, and so I've been watching a lot of friends of mine who are still pastors try to figure out how to do ministry, how to do church during this time. And it's kind of crazy to try to try to figure it out. So I think forward thinkers like you are going to be thought leaders going forward, especially as we come right out of this, probably in another 3 or 4 weeks, to go, okay, what's the new normal? How do we leverage this? What do we do? Um, and for leaders, you said something a moment ago, it's really, really wise, to remind them to check in on the mental health and the mental well-being of their people. That's something not all leaders do naturally, correct?
It's what I see with the leaders that I work with over my career is that they're forward looking for the organization, for their career, for a lot of things, and they don't really reflect on the successes they've had, because hey, I did this yesterday, I got to something new has to happen tomorrow. I can't rest on my laurels. That's great. But they forget that some of their people aren't leaders, don't have
Mm-hmm.
the same abilities, and also aren't at the same place mentally just in their own lives. I mean, you're supporting people that are literally initial startup workers that have never had a job before in a role. And then you have people that literally are not going to be, they're middle managers. You got this range of people, and they all have different motivations for why they work. And I think that leaders sometimes forget. They're like, well, I care about the salespeople. They're the one that generates things and sales and everything. I was like, what about the support people? What about
Yeah.
the ones that are actually being able to do that? And how does that affect morale as an organization? Again, I'm not mushy and soft. This is one of the things that you're going to hear more about now than ever. You're going to start hearing more about gratitude. You're going to start
Yeah.
more hearing about understanding people's emotional state. You're seeing it even from the government. They're talking about the reason a lot of problems are happening because of emotional. We're not talking about mental illness. We're talking about, hey, I'm going through a little crisis here because my
Mm-hmm.
parents are aging, or I'm going through a
Mm-hmm.
crisis here because my kids can't get a job and they have all this college debt. So you're going to hear these things, and they're going to affect workers, and they're going to be like, boss is going to be like, well, that's not my problem. I'm like, well, it becomes your problem because productivity will start to suffer,
Yeah.
engagement will start to suffer, and turnover will start to happen. And you're going to be like, well, you can keep saying that's not my problem, and you can blame it on a generation and say, well, because of them, this happened. Or you can start working and listening to it. And I think as real true leaders through a pandemic, it's amplified, but now people have to deal with it. And
Yeah.
I
And so,
think before they could have had an opportunity to deal with it. And those people that are ahead of it are already like, oh, we've already got something in place because we do
yeah.
try to listen to our people more than just a yearly survey.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. The good ones are good organizations are always going to be good organizations. And those are the ones we learn from, the Chick-fil-A's, the companies like that,
Mhm.
that we go in. All right. I want to shift our conversation just a bit. The pandemic is going to cost some people jobs. It's going to cost people uh, to lose income for a few weeks. We're hearing a lot about the service industry, the restaurant businesses, and those kind of things. So I think a lot of men are going to start thinking about a side hustle, or maybe even going into business for themselves. Internet makes all things possible. We're able to do a lot of cool things because of that. If you were advising some guys that were thinking about, hey, I want a side hustle, um, what are some industries that you think have great potential,
So,
or markets?
yeah, yeah. There's lots of ways to make money, right? You can go to the top 10 list of thriving industries that will continue to grow. And here's the answer that people don't want to hear. It might not be the sexiest industry to get into, but if it's what you're supposed to do, because that's what you're put on earth to do, you got to do it. Now that's different than following your passion. You look, let's take me for example, so you can see how ironic this is, right? So here's a big loudmouth guy from New Jersey that's Italian that has moved to the South,
Mm-hmm.
and you think, well, as my friends told me up north, they were like, "You're never going to make it, right? You're too intense. You talk with your hands. You know, you talk too fast, and all these things are true." And here's what happened: I moved to the South, and all of a sudden, people that were getting bless your hearts and pats on the back and everything's going to be okay when it wasn't, were actually gravitating towards someone who said, I don't think it's going to be okay. What are you going to do about it?" They heard some radical candor from me about things where this is your perception, but here's the reality. And they were like, wow, no one ever says that to me. And these were
Mm-hmm.
leaders at companies and other things. And I was like, hold on. So you're leading this organization. No one had the guts to say it. Well, Mark, they fear me, or I don't really get to have my friends, or I can't really say what I want. So when we go back to your original question, I believe that, people drive Uber and Lyft and they're like, well, this will be my side hustle. And I was like, okay. And I'll say, but why? Right? Why that? Well, I just
Yeah.
need money. And I was like, wrong answer. You want to provide for your family, but I believe there's an opportunity for us to provide for our family in a way, or provide for ourselves. Again, not everyone's married, not everyone has families, but provide for yourself doing what you were equipped to do. That natural skill that you have, that ability that you have. Now, it doesn't mean everybody's going to start their own business. That means you could work for someone, even as a side hustle, right? And still be able to do something. So people want to get into software engineering and they want to get into development. But if you're horrible at that and you don't want to be by yourself and you don't want to code, but those are the jobs, the technology jobs that are booming. The people go, oh, well, I'll just
True.
take a software programming job. I was like, but if you hate it, why would you pick it? So I just want to challenge people. That's why there's not a universal answer.
Okay. So, um, what you're saying requires brutal self-assessment.
just like life, D. If we don't start doing brutal self-assessment, we start believing what the world tells us. And then we go on American Idol and we realize we were the worst singer and everybody's making fun of you. If you start to believe what everybody tells you and you don't understand your God-given purpose on earth and you don't understand what you were supposed to do, you're going to continue to search to fill holes and say, this is what I'm going to do. I've met so many people who have tried multiple jobs saying, well, I think this is what I want to do. And I'm going to go and sell this stuff on Amazon, or I'm going to go and do this business. And I look and I go, how do you know that? Well, you can make money. Wrong answer. Because if it's going to be making money, you can make money doing lots of things because you're going to wind up hating it over time. And I'm not saying not to provide for your family. Again, being an entrepreneur, I've had ups and downs. I have an amazing wife who supported me when I said, you do know you married an entrepreneur. And she's like, oh, I know it because so I want people to really evaluate. And sometimes that requires them being around someone that's going to give them really hard advice to take sometimes, which is, well, why are you afraid? I mean, Dee, has there ever been a time in your life when you had hard advice and someone showed you there was a different way to see
Really?
things?
Really? You're going to bring that up, Mark? Really? See, all right, full disclosure, Mark and I have had a couple of conversations, the most recent of which was at a Cracker Barrel in Cool Springs, Tennessee, where I think I uttered the following phrase to Mark: I don't like you very much. But it was a very candid conversation. And what Mark just told you that we all need to hear, is what he told me. Um, and so I was trying to lead Mark along to kind of give you guys a view of what Mark provides and the service that Mark provides. Look, if you do nothing but pay Mark for whatever it costs to get him to sit down and talk with you, it's worth it, because here's the thing that's going to happen with Mark. He's going to ask really, really smart questions. He's going to ask you questions from the opposite side of whatever situation that you're dealing with that you probably haven't thought of. But then he's going to just not be afraid to ask those brutal questions. But here's the good news: there is contentment on the other side of those hard questions. And Marc has enough New Jersey in him, and he's fine with asking that, and he's fine with people being uncomfortable. And it's really funny because people who know me know I'm kind of that way as well. And so it was kind of funny in my head when I left the restaurant after spending some time with Marc. I thought, oh, so that's what it's like to sit down with me.
Get a little taste of your own medicine.
Yeah. But let me ask you this. We've talked, and you've talked a lot about people finding what they were meant to do. Give us one or two tips about how to do that. Because a lot of guys are listening to this going, yeah, Marc, I get it. We're supposed to find out, but how? How do I find out what I'm meant to do? How do I find out what I was put on earth to do?
You know, it's funny. I work mostly with executives and corporations, right? So the one-on-one individual, what do I want to do in my career coaching is not my gig. I
Right.
like to challenge people to do what they've already kind of stepped around, kind of like our conversation, right? When people tell you, hey, I can't do this because, I love to hear the excuse of why they can't. So let me help if I'm going to give you something really tactile. When you give me all the reasons why you can't do something,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that's the first place to look, because you're believing in only why it can't happen. Now, again, I'm not telling you you're going to go play for the NBA, and the reason why you can't. I'm talking about the things you talk about the most of your time, right? The dialogue you have in your head, the things you tell your friends of why you can't do something. I want to remove the alibis and excuses of why you can't. I want you to really drill down and go, okay, so why can't I go and start my own company? Well, I don't have the money. I'm not smart enough. I can't do it because there's no customers out there for it. And I want to challenge you just in that instance to go and say, okay, so what would it look like if you're wrong? Right? What would it look like if there were more customers? And what would it look like if all of a sudden you said you couldn't do it, but you're not doing it alone, you're going to do it with someone else? Or what? Because if you're talking about something you can't do all the time, I might challenge you
Mm-hmm.
is, why do you talk about what you can't do all the time? Why is that what's leading your life? So again, in our conversation, just because you know it, it's like I kept hearing all the reasons why it was not possible. And I was saying, so it's not possible for you, or it's not possible for anyone? Because there's a big difference in that, right?
True.
It's like,
Yeah.
can you make money off of podcasts? Can you make money off of coaching? Can you make money off of going and selling a product online? I'm like, okay, well, why can't you? And
Mm-hmm.
in the business that's successful, there's still people that say, you know what, this was impossible. I mean, literally, it shouldn't have happened. And that's why I want to go back to the pandemic and say, there's businesses that are going to start out of this pandemic that aren't just people hoarding Purell and selling it online and going and gouging people. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that somebody looks and said, you know what I see? I see this trend that people are going to have to interact in a different way. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I got an idea about how that would look. I was like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you're not the only one that thought that. So all of a sudden you get somebody else that's collaborative and says, well, I don't want to do it alone. Can we start working on this together?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you got this idea. But the thing is that even if it fails, what
Mm-hmm.
did you learn from it? You learned that
Mm-hmm.
your idea that was you thought wasn't successful and wasn't possible actually turned to be something. And actually, you might be able to do it again. So even though failure can potentially happen, you proving that you can do it
Mm-hmm.
actually can move you further than you continuing to talk about your whole life and living with regret.
Yeah. Um, I think we have to look at failure in a new way. I
Mm-hmm.
think the way to look at failure is, let's gather what did I learn from this, and then I can apply that the next time. Um, we just look at failure as being final
Mm-hmm.
way too often, instead of going, okay, that didn't work. Let's try this next thing. And that didn't work. We try this next thing. Again, I think that goes back to being raised with, you were supposed to get one job, keep it for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't supposed to go from job to job or idea to idea. So I think it's a mindset. I think our kids, your kids and my kids' generation will have less of that because they haven't been raised in that. right?
Yeah.
They've seen much different things. But I think the biggest thing that most men struggle with when it comes to this kind of stuff is fear.
Oh yeah. Well, everybody struggles with fear. And then you have the imposter syndrome where you're like, well, once I get there, I'm worried that I'm going to be found out that I'm not as good as you thought I was. So executives have that a lot of times, but everyone has this. Well, if you really knew what was going on in my head,
Yeah.
you wouldn't even trust me to do X, Y, and Z. And, and I think about this. One of the best stories is really where you hear that a room of Fortune 500 CEOs, and you ask them literally how many people have the fear of being found out that, again, not that they're doing anything illegal, that they're not as good. And 90% of them were admitting that they are seen not as good as what they really are, because you always know yourself better,
Yeah.
good enough to go and be like, if people really knew that I didn't know how to do this and it was just luck or providence, or I was like, okay. So if you have to have this self-talk in your head first, you got to deal with that,
Hmm.
right? So when you go back to what should people start doing, if you remove some of that self-talk that said you couldn't, what would you start to do? So first
Yeah.
question is, if you could say it's possible instead of it's completely impossible, what would that look like?
Yeah.
And what's your motivation? Let's go back to the original. What's the motivation for it? Okay, we all
Hmm.
want to provide. We need a survival mode to be able to make money. But what's your real motivation? Why this job? Why
Yeah.
this business? Why? And what's it going to look like if you get the money, but you don't get the success? Or what
Right.
happens if you get the success and you don't get the money? Right? I
Yeah.
want to ask multiple questions to find out really, what does it start to look like, and what's really driving you? Because if you don't find
Yeah.
out what drives you, anything's going to work, and then anything's going to fail because you're like, well, that wasn't what I thought it was.
Yeah. I think that goes back to what we said a few minutes ago too about contentment.
Hmm.
What if you don't get the success or you don't get the money, but if you're doing what fulfills you, what you were made to do, there's an inner contentment there that will sustain you through that until the rest of it comes, whatever it is the rest of it comes. Before I ask you our big three questions, I do want to say this though. You did a good job of this with me, and we only remember what people say negative about us typically. Like uh, if you do your sorry, I had something mess up. Um, if you put something online and it gets 100 ratings and one of them is negative, we focus on the negative. Here's what I'm learning to do when it comes to this fear and this self-talk. I grab on to those positives. Uh, uh, the last time you and I were together, I had a podcast interview, and the person I had interviewed had something really affirming to say to me. That's that great compliment. I say it all the time. I can live for a month on one good compliment. So, men, what I want us to do is to be those people who give those compliments out, who see someone doing a good job. Don't think that it doesn't mean something to them for you to go up to them, especially if you're someone that they trust or they respect or in their roles, and tell them, "Hey, good job." Right? Give them that stuff that they need to live on. A
Hmm.
good compliment.
And it's got to be genuine, right? I mean, if you're
Oh,
gonna give
sure.
somebody a compliment, you got to make sure it's authentic and it's something
Oh,
that
yeah.
But saying it, because people have to be authentic now. Because if you're not, it's going to undermine you and your integrity with others.
Oh, sure. Sure. You don't want to throw them out. Okay. Now we come to my favorite part of the show. The big three questions that every guy that comes on here gets asked, because we're all about equipping, inspiring, and motivating men to be the best version of themselves. And one of the ways that we do that is conversations with successful people like you. And so that's why we always want to ask these three questions. So here's question number one. What has surprised you the most in life?
How insightful an equally yoked wife would be. I never saw that coming.
Wow.
Yeah, my parents divorced. Her parents divorced. I never knew that someone who was completely different than me, from a she's artistic and a business background, how she would literally be able to give me insight, help me with my faith, help bring me to Christ with her family. I mean, there's been so much. Didn't see that coming at all, honestly. Even when I married her, I was happy to get married, but she's shown me more about myself than I could have even ever imagined.
That's awesome. Okay. Question number 2. Who taught you the most about being a man, and what did they teach you?
My 5'2", 4-pack a day smoking dad taught me 2 things when I was young. Okay, so I want to give you a vision, right? So I'm 6 foot. He's 5'2", right? And he said, "Be confident and act like you belong." And when he told me that, I watched this little man get into places, be able to do things, and I kept hearing that when I was young. Now that's not fake it till you make it. That's, Marc, be confident. Nobody's better than you. So when you walk into a room, when you do something, act like you're supposed to be there and no one will question it. And I started doing that my whole life, and that gave me opportunity after opportunity.
Wow. Yeah, because it's real easy for that to slip into fake it till you make it. But I think your dad did a great job in saying no one's better than you.
Right. And it doesn't mean that no one's better than me, which means I'm not better than anyone else. So that's not what it meant. It meant
Right.
that he see people struggle with confidence. And it's easy for somebody who's 5'2" and overweight, a smoker, to literally be like diminished and be like, I'm nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
I saw him not do that. And he didn't want me, even though I was taller than him at a young age, to be able to do that. And, but the key is like, I like to collaborate, so I don't make it about me, but I'm
Right.
confident enough because I know who created me.
That's good. That's good. All right. Last question. If I could take the DeLorean from Back to the Future and pull it up in front of your office there in Franklin, put you in the seat and punch in the date of your 18th birthday and send you back to where you're sitting across from 18-year-old Marc, what would you tell him?
Get your head out of your butt. Yeah, the 18-year-old me was very self-centered and really focused on living for that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell myself, finding Christ will be one of the biggest factors that changed your life forever. And I didn't get it at 18. And I also realized at 18 that being selfish is literally just disrespectful, not just to who created me, but all those around me. And yeah, I was not really proud of my 18-year-old mentality. And again, I was 18, so I could play it off. But luckily, my kids are way better at 18 and than I was. So praise
Yeah,
God that I actually was able to raise children that were smarter than I was at that age.
that's awesome. Marc, you have been a blessing to me and a help to me. And so now I just want to give you a couple of minutes, say whatever you want to about how people can work with you, what you can do for them, how you want to serve them in your business.
Yeah, I I care a lot about marriages and about men respecting their wives. And again, as a dad of 2 daughters, I have a new perspective on females that I never asked for, but I was blessed with 2 daughters, and I get to understand women in a way that until you actually have daughters, I didn't know was possible. So I like to help men be better men and step up and own some of the responsibilities that we've ignored, right? That whole
Okay.
macho being cool kind of thing. So if there's men out there that literally are ready for change, right? Again, I usually work with executives and businesses, but Dee, I know where your heart is, right? So I know how you want to help. So I'm going to offer that someone reaches out to me and mentions that they heard me on this podcast. I'd be happy to have a conversation. And
Mm.
as you know, in 15, 20 minutes, a lot of stuff can get done. It's amazing how quickly, with the
Yes.
right questions and the right open mind, how fast somebody can either call you out on
Mm-hmm.
some of the stuff that you've been lying to yourself about. So I'd offer that up. And the other thing is that, again, I'd like to work with leaders who want to help change organizations. So it's great helping individuals, but I'd love to help individual leaders who can help many people just by their attitude changing and their perspective changing. That's where my heart is that
Yeah.
that impacts so many lives and literally for generations if you do it right. So,
Yeah. So how do they get in touch with you?
so my website is marcawolfe.com. It's MarcAWolfe.com. And they can connect with me on LinkedIn. And most of my handles it's Marc A. Wolfe. And, it's, you do a Google search for Marc Wolfe and Tennessee, I actually come up. So that's pretty good.
All right. Marc, thank you, my friend. This was a blast.
Thank you, Dee. It's always a pleasure having a conversation with you and your listeners.
And we're out. That was cool, dude. You did great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was, I